On January 30th, 2021, I brought you all on a journey through the mind of Zachary in the NES Godzilla Creepypasta. Today, we will be continuing the story by examining its monumental and unforgiving sequel, Godzilla Replay. There will be a lot to take in during this video, as I will be going over plenty of information dedicated to both stories. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy the story behind the sequel to the most disturbing creepypasta of all time.
We apologize for interrupting this video. However, you have an urgent message from Atlas VPN.
This is Atlas VPN. It's a mobile and desktop application created to protect you from dangerous ads, trackers, malware, and cybercriminals. This is done by directing your internet traffic through an encrypted tunnel, thus hiding your IP address and online activities. Atlas VPN is accessible on unlimited devices, so whether you are using its blazing fast speeds to stream an overseas TV series, or saving money while getting the best deals online, Atlas VPN has you covered. In addition to this, it automatically scans the internet for data breaches you are connected to, warning you if your information has been compromised. Atlas VPN is currently running a major discount. You can get a 3-year subscription for just $139 a month, and if you don't like it, they also offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. So what are you waiting for? Get this deal right now by clicking the link in the video description below and protect your online identity with Atlas VPN. Alright, let's go back in time for a moment. The video games of the 1980s pioneered what we know them as today. If it wasn't for a global interest in these 8-bit pieces of interactive media, then we wouldn't be here talking about this story right now. From building your dream megalopolis in SimCity to slashing your way to Ganon in The Legend of Zelda, the titles from this era have been dubbed as classics to many. However, there is one game that might not be as well known as the ones mentioned above, yet has shared nostalgia in the hearts of many children and adults alike. Godzilla Monster of Monsters, published by Toho and released in late 1988 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, is iconic among many. This 8-bit side-scroller is a galactic kaiju battle simulator like no other. Featuring the king of monsters himself, Godzilla, and the guardian kaiju, Mothra, together they join forces to defeat a legion of invasive space monsters across the entire solar system. The mechanics are quite simple. Each planet is represented as a world with multiple levels and bosses, and after reaching the end, you may progress to the next. The game features many familiar kaiju from the Godzilla universe, such as Ghidorah, Gigan, and even Mechagodzilla. And after you defeat these beasts and make your way to the final world, Planet X, you will then battle King Ghidorah. Once defeated, the game ultimately ends, and peace is finally restored back to the solar system. But enough of this game's history. 9 months before the time of recording this script, I uploaded a video titled Godzilla NES, the most disturbing creepypasta of all time. I dedicated 35 minutes to explaining why I thought the NES Godzilla Creepypasta was the best ever. Created by CosbyDaf, the artist responsible for both the writing and art, this lengthy horror story involves a protagonist named Zack who receives what is assumed to be a hacked modification of Godzilla Monster of Monsters. However, as the story progresses, he learns that it isn't actually hacked, but infected with his deepest fears. In order to save his life and the spirit of his late girlfriend Melissa, Zachary must fight through a series of demented worlds and defeat the game's main villain, a towering demonic entity named Red. In the end, Zachary ends up defeating this beast and decides to get rid of the game by selling it on eBay, setting the story up for a direct sequel, which is where we are now. The sequel is titled Godzilla Replay and takes place not too long after the events of the first story. Currently, it's unfinished, but there are 5.5 innovative chapters that not only supplement the main story, but also explain many of its unanswered questions. To begin, I will first be giving you an in-depth overview of each chapter. After that, I will go on to analyze multiple key moments, concepts, and characters introduced throughout the narrative. I will then explain some theories and ideas that have arisen over the years, and finally end it all off by looking towards the future of the story and where CosbyDaf is going to take it next. So without further ado, let's finally dive into the first segment of this video. Welcome to Godzilla Replay. This creepypasta begins with a prologue and an introduction to our new protagonist, Carl. Taking place shortly after the events of the first story, Carl purchases Godzilla Monster of Monsters from Zach off eBay, all for the whopping price of $10. Carl's motivation for purchasing this game stemmed from Zachary's wild story attached to it. Obviously, Carl didn't believe a single thing Zach said about the cartridge, because how could a video game from the 1980s attempt to kill you? Well, having little to no knowledge on the game, nor the Godzilla series as a whole, our protagonist had no idea he was about to embark on the wildest and most twisted adventure of his life. The first chapter begins with Carl's anticipation for something to go wrong. He was promised a supernatural experience after all. Upon booting up the game, he notices the last game option is gone, more or less pointing to Zachary's progress being completely erased from existence. Not too fazed by this, he progresses to the actual game and is greeted with a shocking surprise. Having played Monster of Monsters on an emulator before, Carl knew this wasn't how the map was supposed to look. From a prehistoric jungle with dinosaurs, to a seaside beach with biting crabs, the levels Carl played weren't anything remotely close to what Zachary experienced. Carl became a little unnerved by the third level, where glitched music, sprites, and a surprise fight with King Ghidorah appeared, a boss who isn't supposed to be faced until the very end. But luckily enough, the game glitched to a point where it kicked him out of the fight, where he then proceeded to the final level of the first world. Here he had to dodge a horde of aggressive dinosaurs, before facing off one-on-one with a Triceratops. However, to Carl's surprise, there was also a free-falling nuke on the horizon, and a timer counting down from 1 minute. With only 4 seconds to spare, Carl defeated the boss, in a cutscene displaying the now mutated dinosaur emerging into the world as Godzilla played before his eyes. A nice callback to Godzilla's origin story. But Carl knew deep down that things were only getting started, and he had no idea what was about to happen next. Chapter 2 opens with a bewildered Carl sending an email to Zachary, detailing the events of the first world. "I told you before, I don't know how the game does these things," Zach responded. "If you're suggesting I put these graphics in the game myself, you're mistaken, because this is the first I've seen of any of it. It looks like the game has recreated itself again since I played it. That's not a good sign. After proclaiming Zack's response as unhelpful, Carl progresses to the second world, Gelid, and gazes at each of the 6 levels, which were titled Tundra, Ice Cave, Isolation Zone, Lost Way, Temple of Silence, and Sin, respectively. In the first level, Carl finally gets to play as Godzilla. Nothing about this stage is too out of the ordinary at first, other than the introduction to unconventional enemies, somewhat similar to those found in Zack's playthrough. But as he advances through the frozen landscape, the gently falling snow evolves into a blizzard, becoming worse the further he progresses. Towards the end, Carl notices frozen corpses buried in the snow. At this point, if you found an enemy alive, there was little to no movement from them at all. The second level and first boss fight were uneventful compared to the first, other than the introduction to a few new monsters. But it's during the third level, Isolation Zone, where the story takes a weird turn. This stage appears to be set in space, where floating crystals hover above the platform. Upon attacking them, one of 2 things happen. Either a baby-like creature falls out, or Godzilla gets teleported to another area. After being transported to a variety of odd locations, Carl found himself in one with a curious yet benevolent creature. When approached, it said, "The first man to walk on the moon was Ezekiel Zanderfruit," then disappeared. Confused, Carl proceeds to the next mini-boss, then on to the 4th level, Lost Way. This stage consists of countless platforms and arrows, all pointing in a variety of directions. After attempting to follow them to find an exit, Carl soon realized 3 things. 1. The arrows actually lead to dead ends, and are used to trick the player. 2. There's a mix of both hostile and non-hostile creatures spread throughout the level, and each of them are lost like he is. And 3. That the gold blocks are the key to escaping. After navigating his way around the level with a horde of friendly creatures trailing behind him, Carl comes across a small green creature named Usal, who begs for his assistance. Without thinking, Carl said "sure" out loud, before a second text box appears with a reply, "Thank you." Obviously this freaked him out. Just like Red's reaction to Zack's proclamation in the first story, Carl began to question the reality of his situation. But there was no need to look too deep into it. After all, it was just a video game, and it only made sense that Godzilla was meant to help Usal anyway. After locating the exit and proceeding to the 5th level, Temple of Silence, Carl is confronted with the most perplexing and disturbing events thus far. As the name suggests, this level is completely soundless, but harbors a variety of grotesque monsters, such as this contorted abomination, with its arms tied behind its body and mouth sewn shut. After clearing the stage, Carl advances to the last level, Sin, which isn't actually a level at all, but a boss battle with a bipedal cyclops demon named Lothar. With basically zero effort, Carl defeats the monster with little damage to himself. After doing so, the screen transitions to a mysterious gate, consisting of 7 slots, where the symbol for the demon he just defeated appeared into. But Carl had enough at this point. The events thus far were too incomprehensible for his brain to handle. So he stood up, turned off the game, and took a break. In the second half of Chapter 2, Carl returns to the game, but this time to investigate the password menu. At first glance, he noticed it was slightly different from the original title, with a few missing features and some strange text in the bottom right. He attempted to input the names of the worlds from Zack's playthrough, but to no avail. He then began inputting codes from the base game. Most of them didn't do anything, except for 2. The first code brought him to the sound test menu, which didn't do much, but the second code, destroy all monsters, loaded Carl into an area where he could freely play as a mechanized beast that uses a club to smash innocent creatures. Feeling disturbed by the carnage, Carl exits the minigame immediately. Next, Carl selected the odd text at the bottom right. It brought him to a new keyboard layout in an unfamiliar language. He began to input random sequences of characters for the hell of it, and was actually greeted with a variety of strange and eerie events. After trying a few of them out, he went back to the English keyboard to input something he remembered from earlier, Xander fruit. The Transcendence Project. Carl wondered what it could mean, and was even more curious about the warning in red that said do not redistribute this cartridge. After pressing start, the game requested an authorization code. All of this led to more questions than answers. With no way to progress further, Carl retreated from the password menu, feeling more lost than before. The third chapter begins the following day. Carl reveals he hasn't been able to sleep properly, but not because of nightmares or anything, but because the game has been the only thing on his mind. That morning, he calls in sick to work and proceeds to boot up the game and activate the third world, Corona. The map consisted of 4 level types and a mini-boss, which happened to be King Kong. Since the Sin Demon was only 4 spaces away, Carl could easily rush this map. However, he decided to take it slow and investigate each level, starting with the first one, Power Plant. This level is dark and ominous, consisting of granite bricks, storm clouds, and power poles. As Carl progressed deeper into the level, he noticed some of the poles had electric chairs attached to them, and a few even with creatures strapped in. After observing the mechanics of the level, he realized it wasn't only a power plant, but also an execution field. Carl emphasized that the screams from the creatures as their brains got fried were some of the most unsettling sounds he's ever heard. The next level, Reflect, was similar to Isolation Zone back on Gelid, only this time, instead of crystals, Carl had to traverse through teleporting mirrors. After wandering through the maze and running into some abnormal events, Carl discovered a mirror with a creature inside. Upon breaking it, a text box appeared. Even with his limited knowledge of the Godzilla Kaiju universe, Carl actually recognized Rodan. With this new player, he considered using it in the upcoming boss battle with King Kong, but chose Godzilla instead. During their battle, the game began glitching again, and ended spontaneously after Kong was seemingly abducted from the fight. In the third level, Patzer, Carl chose to play as Rodan. This was yet another purple level, but with a chess theme this time. When it started, a text box appeared on screen, revealing the goal: seize a king. The enemies were black and white chess pieces, but they were too busy fighting each other to even notice Carl flying around. After traversing across the board, Carl discovered the White King. He flew into the piece, and upon doing so, the game announced the black team as the winners and brought him back to the map. In the last level, Carl wanders through a dark and dense forest. He felt a little on edge here, not only because of the setting and music, but also because of the giant flying creatures that abduct what are assumed to be the benevolent creatures of these woods. However, it's at this point in the narrative where Carl encounters a reoccurring and highly distressing entity. Right after all color and life gets sucked out of the forest, this thing appears. Carl watches in shock as this formidable being orders him to leave, then is immediately pushed back to the map. Disturbed, yet curious to find out what just happened, Carl proceeds to finish the world and selects the final boss fight, a sin demon named Exaltin. This battle was more challenging than the previous one. Exaltin could fly, use ranged attacks, and recharge its power via lightning strikes. But with some compelling maneuvering, Carl managed to defeat this monstrosity and collected the purple sin symbol for the gate. But there was still something eating Carl's mind. Who or what was that disturbing thing in the forest? And why did it ask him to leave? Chapter 4 begins like the others. However, Carl expresses discomfort in his inability to actually sleep this time. But since his mind is still curious for answers, he boots up the game once again and dives into the fourth world, Amorphis. During the first level, Carl encounters a creature asking why it can't be strong like the others. He decides to respond by questioning how this game can hear him. The creature answers by saying, "I hear with my ears." Maybe it was the lack of sleep, but Carl wasn't too fazed by this encounter. After all, the game has been an absolute mind mess so far. As he progresses further, Carl runs into a familiar face. "I used to have a home here," Usal announced. "It wasn't always like this." Carl felt sorry for the little guy. Usal obviously lost everything and had nothing left for himself. Carl wanted to console him, but had no idea how to even do that to a video game character. However, since he was on a mission to find more info on the Transcendence project, Carl knew he needed to ask if Usal knew any passwords. To his surprise, Usal actually knew one, though warned Carl not to tell anyone, or else they might go after him. Before Carl had the chance to ask any more questions, Usal took to the air and flew away. With this current information, Carl heads back to the main menu and accesses the password screen. He re-enters the code Xanderfruit and proceeds to enter the 8-digit number into the Transcendence project. It's at this point in the creepypasta where a lot of information gets revealed. Information that explains the reasoning why this game is what it is. I will delve into this later in detail in the video, but for now, this is what Carl experienced inside the Transcendence project. Carl was greeted with a series of logs dating back to August 3rd, 1997. The first log read as follows. A game cartridge was sent to me via anonymous donation. The letter was included warning of strange occurrences regarding the game. I am taking it to my lab for proper testing. Ran preliminary tests today. I have determined that the game is an anomaly. Further testing needed. As Carl studied the logs, he learns that numerous individuals experienced the same thing he's currently going through. One of the readings even recorded something similar to Zachary's original playthrough, with the first world showing little to no signs of anomalies, but the second being where everything goes haywire. In another log, it's discovered that each test subject experiences completely different games from one another. One of them even recognizing in-game events from earlier in their life. After doing some more digging, Carl acquired knowledge of some rules about the game. The first one is that only a single player can experience anomalies. If 2 or more people are playing at the same time, or one is watching another, anomalies will not occur. Additionally, these anomalies interact with humans by using some sort of connection to another realm. However, this connection can be broken if the player is interrupted from an outside source. But as Carl kept reading, he discovered some disturbing entries towards the end, such as this one. Group test day 9. Jeremy was rushed to the hospital after having an epileptic seizure. His family has a history of epilepsy, but he has had no prior seizures. Jeremy claims that it was brought on by a devil he encountered in the game. Jeremy also claims that the anomalies are demonic in nature. He has since left the project. Then the final log, titled Group Test Day 13, and dated September 21st, 1997, reads as follows. Jeremy's incident has left a strong impression on the group. Out of the original 9, only 3 are continuing with their tests. Their fears and anxiety seem to be making an impression on their game worlds. I worry that this may attract malignant entities. None of the controllers have completed their respective games as of this time. Once again, Carl was greeted with more questions than answers. Did this mean everything in Zachary's story was true? What about the devil Jeremy was referring to? And why didn't anyone continue studying the project? Carl felt lost, but there was nothing he could do at this point but continue with the game and hope to unfold every answer. After returning to Amorphis, Carl encountered some disturbing enemies and events over the next 2 levels. However, towards the end of his travels, Carl ran into an unexpected character who had something interesting to say. Hi there, you don't know me, but I was the one who helped you defeat Kong. If we work together, I think we can win this. But before Carl could ask any questions, a bolt of green lightning struck down from the sky and obliterated the helpful creature. The scene suddenly became darker. Then moments later, the hideous beast from earlier materialized in front of Carl and ordered him to leave once again. Carl attempted to blast it away with Godzilla's heat beam, but to no avail. The figure then gave Carl one final warning before darting away into the darkness. But Carl knew he wasn't leaving yet. There was still too much to unravel, so he continued on to the Sin Demon. The fight was somewhat difficult as it possessed the ability to shapeshift, but as per usual, Carl defeated the demon, collected the green sin symbol, and slotted it into the gate. Despite his victory, Carl had to process all of the questions that kept coming back to him. How could he help Usul? Why did that one creature help him with Kong? Who the hell is this dark beast? And most importantly, why is this game an anomaly? At the time of writing this script, Tempest is currently the last completed chapter of this creepypasta. Like previous chapters, Carl begins by examining the world map. It sports a dark blue tinge and 3 distinct levels. After entering the first one, he discovers the setting takes place on the peak of a mountain, with heavy winds making it a burden to maneuver. As he progresses through the blusterous hellscape, Carl has to dodge flying body parts whenever the wind picks up, in addition to hole-punched corpses disposed all over the ground, presumably stabbed to death from the needle-nosed monsters. After making his way towards the end of the level, Carl finds an empty clearing with no enemies around, and a lone Usal standing there. "I can't find my family," he cries. "They're probably dead." However, moments later, Carl watches in horror as a dark creature manifests itself behind Usal and kidnaps him. Carl now had a new mission: rescue Usal. He proceeded back to the world map and noticed a new character on the board. Everything about this game has been weird so far, but he appreciated the extra hand. Carl uses the kaiju for the next level, where he learns its name is King Caesar. He navigates through each level in a frenzy, accelerating as fast as possible to find the answers he so desired, and to rescue his new friend. But first, Carl had to endure a few levels with bizarre phenomena, such as being struck by a needle tree that injected his character with psychedelic liquids, more grotesque monsters, and very disturbing encounters, to say the least. But time wasn't on his side. For some reason, the map kept changing as long as he had King Caesar when he attempted to gain access to the Sin Boss. Carl had no idea what to do other than kill him off. He figured it must have been a glitch, so much to his regret, Carl disposed of King Caesar. When he returned to the map, he was relieved to discover he could finally access the final boss. Salak was a brutal one. The battle lasted longer than he had hoped, but Carl ultimately defeated the demon and proceeded to collect the dark blue Sin Stone. Usually when a boss battle ends, the game takes you to the next world. However, this time, Carl was transported back to the map. Confused, he noticed that King Caesar has been brought back, but as a boss this time. After entering the fight, Caesar's health was already low, so Carl assumed it would be an easy battle. But oh, was he so wrong. After shouting at Caesar for his backstabbing antics, the brown-haired beast began to transform into the menace that has been plaguing Carl since the beginning of his journey. Warlock. Carl knew it was now or never. He had to face the demonic entity responsible for everything he's endured so far, so he attacked the monstrosity. The battle was more than Carl could handle, as Warlock delivered powerful blows and beams of energy. Warlock even began blasting away the mountaintops, leaving Carl with little room for his character to stand on. Then Carl gives it everything with one final heat beam, before Warlock suddenly interrupts the battle. Carl was beyond frustrated at this point. He had no idea how much more his mind could handle, but he was still set on locating every answer, and determined to liberate his dear pal Usal. Alright, so that concludes the first part of this video. Next, there are numerous features from this creepypasta that I want to analyze in more detail. So first, let's dive into the Transcendence project. As we already know, Carl purchased the game from Zachary via eBay. He didn't initially believe Zach when he warned that the game had supernatural characteristics, but later changed his mind after experiencing some very unusual anomalies. This is where the Transcendence project comes in, and it happens to be the answer as to why this game is what it is. The first thing we learn in both creepypastas is that the game changes for the player. Any individual who boots up the cartridge experiences their own version of the game, or in other words, their own personalized hell. For those of you who read the first story, you most likely noticed that Red was missing. Why would such an iconic villain be left out from the sequel to one of the most popular creepypastas? Well, Red isn't seen or referenced in Carl's playthrough because he was never part of Carl's mind, only Zachary's. Remember back in 2020 when the whole every copy of Super Mario 64's personalized thing was floating around the internet? Well, this game is exactly that. A personalized adventure that only affects the individual player. As referenced in the story, the first log dates back to August 1997, where it was anonymously gifted to a researcher. It's unclear if the game possessed its anomalous properties before this date, but we do know it was tested on multiple subjects, whom all experienced major differences during their playthroughs. The most notable trial was conducted in September 97, where a man had to be rushed to hospital after encountering an entity known as the Devil. This kind of makes me think that the game is from hell. Yes, literal hell, constructed by the dead and to be used as a gateway to the human realm. But I'll come back to this idea in a few minutes. Anyways, to be honest, the Transcendence project is probably the most intriguing concept in all of Replay's current entirety. Not only does it explain the reasoning behind the distorted worlds of Zachary and Carl's playthroughs, but still also keeps the mystery and suspense alive, as we only learn about its function, not purpose. Out of curiosity, I decided to dig around on CosbyDaf's Discord server to see if I could find any additional information regarding the project, and yes, I actually found some interesting things. In October 2019, Cosby elaborated on how the game creates personalized anomalies for the player. He states, "You hook up the game, the anomaly within starts to connect with your mind and perform some kind of calculation, then the early stages of the game glitches up during this. The anomaly determines there is a task for the specific player to accomplish. They either complete or fail that task and the transcendence ends." However, another interesting point brought up by multiple people is that the Transcendence project isn't actually real, and is only part of Carl's personalized playthrough. This can be testified by the reaction Warlock gives to Carl regarding the journal after discovering it. If the game can make up demons, it would only make sense that they know everything about the game. But whatever the case may be, CosbyDaf has confirmed several times that the Transcendence project will return, and I can't wait to see where he takes it next. This then leads us into the game's main villain, Warlock. When we first meet him in Chapter 3, he orders Carl to leave the game. We are left confused as he gives no reasoning behind this. Then when Carl encounters Warlock a second and third time, the same situation occurs, only this time Warlock kills a creature attempting to aid Carl, and then combats him in Chapter 5. This leaves the entire presence of Warlock a mystery. There have been some theories over the years stating that Warlock might actually be good and is trying to prevent Carl from something within the game. However, this should be discredited now, as CosbyDaf has confirmed that Warlock is actually evil as hell. So I guess this begs the question, why does Warlock want Carl to quit playing? Well, I think it has something to do with a demonic presence. Like I said earlier, this game might have been either constructed or possessed by something demonic in nature. We can attest to this by examining key story elements. First, we have the final world bosses, which are known as sin demons, each protecting a relic used for something called the Sin Gate. It's currently unknown as to what's behind this gate, but if I had to take a wild guess, I feel it might just actually be the gate to hell. You see, CosbyDaf has implemented subtle details into making the world of Replay the embodiment of the underworld, and this begins with the 7 deadly sins. Starting with Gelid, we have a world representing sloth. In the first level, the enemies become slower as Carl pushes onwards, as the cold is a metaphor for slowing down. Even the name of the boss, Lethar, happens to be the first 6 letters of lethargic. In the third world, Corona, we have Pride. Here we discover a creature admiring itself in the mirror. Then for the final boss, we find Exultant, which plays on the word exalted, meaning being at a high or powerful level or feeling superior than another. The fourth world, Amorphis, represents envy. The first clue is showcased by the color green everywhere, more or less hinting towards the phrase green with envy. After this, one of the first creatures encountered displays high acts of jealousy. Then finally, the last boss is named Odia, short for odious, a word for being hateful. And finally, we have the fifth world, Tempest, which represents lust. The imagery in this one is very potent and found almost everywhere. Firstly, the needle-nosed monsters in the first level kill their victims by penetrating them. There's plenty of monsters that use their tongues to attack. There are references to birthing and children. The boss's name is Salak, which is short for salacious. And there's even a creature who is, well, doing things to himself. On top of this, wind is a reoccurring theme here, and is a callback to the 9 circles of hell from Dante's Inferno, where strong winds are used to keep lustful individuals apart from one another. And since this story isn't complete yet, it only makes sense there will be at least 3 more chapters, each representing the sins for gluttony, greed, and wrath. So with all of this put together, I feel it isn't too far-fetched to believe that the story will progress into something darker than it currently is. Maybe once Carl opens the Sin Gate, he will reveal an entrance to hell, or maybe he will even have to fight the devil. These are all things that Warlock might be afraid of. Which then brings me to the next segment of this video, the future of the story. As stated before, the creepypasta is currently unfinished. However, Chapter 6 is currently in the works. Luckily for us, CosbyDaf has teased plenty of information from Chapter 6, which is known as Alkali. At first glance, it appears Alkali will represent greed, as the teasers showcase an industry-heavy world, which may or may not also comment on social issues. In addition to this, CosbyDaf has also confirmed various new mechanics, such as implementing a bird's eye view perspective during parts of gameplay, and a few new characters will meet along the way. But there are some things I personally hope will get answered in Chapter 6, such as what happened to Yusal, the strange language in the password menu, who Warlock is and what he wants, why the friendly creature saved Carl from King Kong, who the devil is, and of course, what will happen once the Sin Gate is open. But as of right now, I can honestly say that Godzilla Replay is undoubtedly my most favorite creepypasta story ever. I know I said this about the first story, and it was the entire reason I made a 30-minute video on it, but I've been working on this one for a while now, and have become heavily invested within Replay's elements, characters, story, and lore. It builds on what NES Godzilla started. Each chapter brings us something new that carries us to the next, and becomes more complex and confusing as the story progresses. None of this is a bad thing. Our hope for additional information is what captivates us, and Replay does an incredible job at captivating its readers by taking them on a comprehensive, full-scale adventure. While the original NES Godzilla Creepypasta is disturbing in its own right, and easily fits the traditional definition of a creepypasta, Replay is simply much grander in scale. It reminds me of that feeling you get when you read an epic science fiction novel. The experience of discovery, curiosity, and wonder. Every moment is anticipated as it creeps forward, leaving you on the edge of your seat. This is what Replay is all about. CosbyDaf is single-handedly crafting a universe from the ground up. A universe that travels beyond every horror element found within the first creepypasta. He's building a world for all of us to experience. So we better get out there and explore it. Anyway, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching my video. I've put a lot of work into researching the story, writing the script, recording, and editing. So if you could leave a like and a comment, then let me know your thoughts. That would honestly help me so much. Additionally, make sure to support the creators responsible for making this creepypasta a reality. I'll be referencing them all within the credits. And lastly, don't forget to grab your offer with Atlas VPN. The 3-year subscription with an extra 3 months free is just $139 per month. It seriously is a stellar deal, and easily worth the price. But on that note, thank you so much for watching, and good night.